afternoon. We know the start of the new year in Minnesota here has been anything but typical for the people who call this home. I think a word I heard today that sets the stage for all of this is we're in the state of processing what is going on right now in the first couple of weeks of this new year. I want to begin, Congressman, by asking you, what is your message to the people you represent in the first district with what we have seen play out?
Yeah, so I definitely acknowledge that it has been challenging first couple of weeks of this new year. I think some of the terms that I've heard and actually have used myself is it can be exhausting at times. It's disheartening and quite frankly, it can be frustrating. And I was in a committee hearing here in Washington D.C. just a couple days ago, and I said, we pride ourselves on being Minnesota nice. We pride ourselves on being the beautiful land of 10,000 lakes. And it's just been exhausting lately because it's day after day, story after story. We've become the state of 10,000 stories, whether it's fraud or just the constantly moving news of the day. It seems like it's fast and furious. And so it's my hope that we can get to a point here sooner rather than later where some calmer, cooler heads can prevail, and that we can work our way through some of these really challenging and tough conversations that we're having to have in Minnesota.
I want to jump into the focus of these conversations to talk about the immigration enforcement efforts on the federal level going on right now in Minnesota. It's not just in the Twin Cities. We are seeing it playing out in Rochester and other communities as well. So I want to pose this question to you, Congressman. Is the current level of ICE operations in Minnesota right now justified, or should, as some people have stated, this all be toned down due to the high tensions we are seeing, particularly in the Twin Cities?
Well, I appreciate that question, and let's make no mistake about it. The Biden administration absolutely broke our southern border, and we saw the illegal immigration numbers at a level that was unsustainable. And with that, it brought some of the worst from all over the world. And it's estimated in Minnesota right now we have over 30,000 people on the DHS watch list in regards to those that have crossed the border illegally with a criminal background. And so as we've seen this uptick in ICE enforcement in our local communities, I will say that they are arresting and deporting the worst of the worst. We're talking about sex traffickers. We're talking about child molesters. We're talking about drug dealers. And that list now is available on the DHS website, where you're able to see, here's who they're pulling off the streets right here in our backyard in Rochester and in southern Minnesota and the Twin Cities. And so, I don't think anybody in southern Minnesota says, I'm willing to risk it. And let's just see if we can wing it and see if our streets will just magically become safe. There is a need for law and order. I was talking to local law enforcement in our communities and asking our police chiefs and our patrol officers, tell me what the day-to-day life looks like right now. And I heard a couple really compelling stories. One, that the need just to be able to be respectful for law enforcement and let them do their job. Two, they know where their role is. Their role is to protect our local communities. ICE has a much different role. The immigration enforcement officers are doing what their job duties call them to do. But if you look at the last 4 years through the Biden administration and how we had these frustrations from our local law enforcement officers that were arresting folks that had broke the law, and they were held in jail, and they were on deportation orders. ICE never showed up to get them from the local offices. The judicial system in our country says we can't detain them forever, and they were released back onto the streets. That's the kind of mess that's being cleaned up right now. And I think, again, we need to make sure that it is done in the most respectful, safe, peaceful way. And that goes from not only the law enforcement side, but also from we as citizens of this great country.
Today, a former ICE director who served in the Obama administration went so far as saying that there needs to be, in her words, a timeout, citing the anger on both sides. So why not then call a pause, not put an end to it, but just put a pause to it as this plays out? You're talking about the need to play catch up, but what we're seeing playing out right now, do you fear that we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg in terms of what escalation could happen?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I don't want escalation, and I don't want tempers and the temperature to rise. But on the same note, how do we, in good conscience, sleep at night knowing that there is 30,000 people that illegally came into this country that have criminal records? And again, sex traffickers, child molesters, drug dealers. How do we sleep at night knowing that they're still running free in our streets and not take that serious? So I would say, to the former director, she took a timeout for 4 years. They weren't cooperating with our local law enforcement. They were literally not answering the phone calls when our local police chief would say, "Hey, we got this so and so arrested. He's sitting in our jail. He's on detention on deportation orders. Come get him," and they don't. And so they have to release that individual back into our streets. There's time for sanity. And again, I would just say there is a way to do this while we lower the temperatures and have a conversation about, what does this look like for the future? How do we get sanity to our border? How do we get sanity to our immigration system? That can happen. But I would just say that, taking a time out and just pretending that this magically fixes itself is not the answer.
I think another question, at least on the news side of things, we are hearing from viewers when we interact with them is the question, and I'm sure you get it as well, why so much on Minnesota? And in doing some research here, the numbers show, according to the latest census data that is available, Minnesota's foreign-born population represents about 8% of the state's total population, according to the 2024 data. The state doesn't come within, then, Congressman, the top 10 states for the greatest number of foreign-born people living in Minnesota. So when you look at lists, Minnesota isn't ranking toward the top. Some would say this is a political game, I will use that term game, between a feud between the President of the United States and the governor of Minnesota. Your reaction to that?
Yeah, I don't think it's a game when Minnesota is now number one when it comes to the fraud. And I mean, we all can take an honest look at this and say, listen, the reason we are on the news day in, day out, all across this nation, the reason that we are a perceived target or we are on the radar screen for a lot of different federal agencies is because of the fraud. Upwards to $9 billion of state and federal tax dollars, hardworking taxpayer money that was intended to help our neighbors in need was criminally taken from us. And there was blind eyes turned to this. I mean, we have wrote letter after letter. We have asked the governor and the administration of this state to show us something that you've done to fix this fraud. Who has anybody been fired that was administering these programs? And stonewalled after stonewalled, we were just not getting those the pieces of information. And it has become the news story of the day. I can't walk 20 feet down the hall in Congress here without someone asking me, what's going on in Minnesota? What's all this fraud about? And it has put us in the news. And because of that, you look at some of the fraud and some of the cases where the prosecutions have happened, where people have ended up in jail, and we're starting to see more and more information come out in regards to how some of the dollars that were fraudulently taken from our federal and state programs were then sent away to foreign countries for different purposes. It begs the question, like, what is going on? Where does this fraud start? Where does this fraud stop? And how big is this problem that we have in front of us? And so people all over this country are paying attention to Minnesota.
And I do want to talk more about fraud here in a moment, but circling back specifically to the ICE situation in Minnesota and what happened last week, 1 week ago today, in fact. Congressman, should there be a criminal investigation into the actions taken by the ICE agent involved, Jonathan Ross?
I think there should be a full investigation to the entire situation. And we as Americans, we as Minnesotans need to demand that, but we also need to trust our law enforcement. We need to trust our judicial system and the legal system that there will be a full investigation, that we practice as much patience as possible to let that play out, not quickly run to judgment, and to really make sure that the investigation happens so we can be fully educated and aware of, what were the moments that led up to that? What's the history around the day, and how did we get to that situation in the first place? But yes, we definitely are owed a a full investigation, and that would be the most healthy thing that could happen in just a horrific, series of events that happened that day.
Should then the state of Minnesota be allowed to be part of that investigation?
We're going to leave that up to the legal experts, but there was a federal law enforcement officer that was involved in the ICE agent, so that it does fall under the federal jurisdiction. So I am under the understanding that this will be a job for the FBI and the DOJ to fully investigate. But I will be in full communications on behalf of Minnesotans to make sure we know where that investigation is going and what's happening on those fronts.
On the day of the shooting, Congressman, you released a statement saying, in part, quote, "These dangers have continued to escalate because of the anti-law enforcement rhetoric and the sanctuary policies that these so-called leaders continue to perpetuate." Do you agree that there is also rhetoric on the other side among GOP lawmakers on the state and the federal level and the White House and the president, the Trump administration, that the finger pointing back and forth, sometimes that finger also has to point back at ourselves? So this balancing act of rhetoric versus one party versus the other, how should the general public make sense of that?
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Brock. I mean, I do think that the answer and the solution to the frustrations and the emotions that we all feel is not solved with more hollering, name calling, and finger pointing. And if you look at my statement, it was specifically in regards to the fact that our DHS and ICE enforcement officers have seen a 1,800% increase in assaults, 3,200% increase in assaults by vehicles, 8,000% increase in death threats just in the last few months. There has to be a common sense, calm, cool response in regards to, listen, we can do better than that. Is there guilt on both sides? For sure, there's guilt on both sides. There has been strong, harsh rhetoric, but I would say our solutions will be found in, lowering the temperature, having conversations, making sure that they're rooted in the right amount of balance of emotion and intellect. But we're not going to find answers to some of these biggest challenges by continuing down the path to play this game of I'm right, you're wrong, I'm smart, you're stupid.
I want to ask now, curious personally, and I'm sure our viewers are as well, Congressman, how are you and your fellow members of Minnesota's congressional delegation being briefed on ICE operations in Minnesota? Do you have a daily briefing? Do you get a chance to ask questions? How are you being informed?
Yeah, so as of now, we're not getting a daily briefing. My staff, our congressional staff, delegation staff, was on a call with DHS yesterday. We are in the process of working on setting up another call here within the next day and a half. I am also organizing a call with local law enforcement officers with DHS to make sure that if there's any unanswered questions, any confusion, any, I guess, quite frankly, just lack of communications, that I am trying my best to help spearhead conversations with our local communities and DHS so that we can be proactively communicating with each other to hopefully avoid some of these unnecessary lapses of communications and, quite frankly, the spreading of lies or half-truths or fear.
Have you been provided, your office been provided any cost estimates associated with these increased efforts in Minnesota? We've been told it's the largest DHS effort of its type in the country. Price tag wise, what are we hearing?
So we haven't been briefed yet on the cost for this operation. We are actually debating the Department of Homeland Security's budget, appropriations budget here in Congress in the next couple of weeks. And so I'm sure that will be part of that conversation here in the short term, but no specific numbers as to date.
And I want to turn to news that developed yesterday that I'm sure you are well aware of. Do you have any ethical concerns about the reports out that the Trump administration has been trying to tell federal prosecutors in Minnesota, now whom have resigned, saying that the ethical components of this are not what is within their realm of what they feel is correct, to investigate the shooting victim, Renee Good, her widow, for potential ties to activist organizations? Is that something of concern to you in what's being alleged?
I guess I would say my biggest concern right now is everyone is rushing to judgment based on what they think they know or they don't know. I specifically don't know the details of that story yet. I don't know why, some of those prosecutors resigned. I mean, I will tell you, everyone in the world of the DOJ and those of us in Congress knew that Joe Thompson was the acting U.S. attorney. By definition of title, acting means he was holding that role until an official permanent appointment was made. Daniel Rosen has been appointed as the U.S. attorney in Minnesota. That has become effective. So there was widespread knowledge that Joe wouldn't be the director, the U.S. attorney anymore. That was an acting title. Where he's went, why he's left, I still, I don't know the story. I don't think you or your viewers completely know. And so I would just say this is another time where we can respond to what we think may or may not be true, or we can wait a couple moments until we know the fullness of the facts and then make conversations and comments after we're fully informed.
And that being said, I do want to follow up the idea of not jumping to conclusions or speculating and making statements before we have all the information. Would you agree, though, that some of what we've seen play out specifically with Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, she was very matter-of-factly right off the get-go here saying XYZ happened. So in that same vein, do you have that same word of caution to the secretary?
I have that same word of caution to anybody in public life, because that very same moment you're citing when Secretary Noem was making those comments, we had a governor of Minnesota and a mayor of Minneapolis making some very outrageous claims, profanity-laced claims at the same very time. So this is, again, one of those examples where typically when you act in the heat of emotion in regards to response to some very, tough situations, it's best to pause. And I would say that, there is guilt on all hands on that front.
All right, let's turn the attention here to fraud. You and I had a conversation, a candid conversation in early December, about a month ago here, as this was starting to ramp up. You had mentioned the many communications you have had specifically with the governor's office to seek answers, accountability, and so forth. We've seen a lot happen in that month since we last talked. What would you say right now in terms of the status of the fraud issue as it relates to what we're seeing with the ICE presence in Minnesota? Are you at all concerned, Congressman, that the traction there is going to be lost because of this?
Yeah, I mean, I sure hope not. I do worry a little bit that, and I use this word very, very carefully, that ICE and what is happening with the surge is distraction type politics to what is really, really needed in regards to the continuing investigations on the fraud. I think we need to do both, and I think we can talk about both intellectually and seriously. But we are the tip of the iceberg. And again, this is words from acting U.S. Attorney at the time, Joe Thompson, saying that the fraud is projected now in his estimation to be up to $9 billion, billion with a B. And we're talking about fundamental programs that I think most neighbors would say, yes, we should, as taxpayers, help fund our neighbors that maybe have children with autism or need daycare help or feeding hungry kids in times of in tough times. So it really played it, quite frankly, these fraudsters played us as chumps. They played on the goodwill of Minnesotans to being willing to give the shirt off our back for our neighbor in need, and they fleeced us. They fleeced the taxpayers of this state and this federal government.
2 days prior to the ICE-involved shooting in Minneapolis, we heard from Governor Walz saying he is no longer going to seek re-election this year, largely due to all of the attention because of the fraud, going as far as saying, the buck stops with him and that he accepts responsibility. Is that enough in your viewpoint, Congressman, to acknowledging the situation Minnesota is in right now?
I mean, I think it was a mature decision on his part to understand and to realize that politically it was a no-win situation for him, that the damage was done. The fraud was on his watch. He, for right or for wrong, he is, and he was the CEO of the state of Minnesota. And ultimately the responsibility lies with him and his administration, and they have failed. And so for him to make that decision, I think probably was the right move and the right call. But I will tell you that The responsibility doesn't end with that decision. The responsibility is still there, and he's still governor as we speak. His Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan is still the Lieutenant Governor. We still have Attorney General Keith Ellison in office, and they all need to be held to question, but they also need to show us, like, what are you doing in regards to uncovering more of this fraud and being very specific about how did it happen? How can we make sure it never happens again? And are the bad guys and gals going to jail? That's what voters in southern Minnesota, that's why my constituents are asking me all the time, like, why are people not in jail right now?
So what then do you anticipate happening here in the days and weeks to come? We know the governor, as well as the Attorney General, Keith Ellison, are set to testify in a House Oversight Committee on this matter in about a month, if I'm not mistaken. There, we also hear about the talk of federal funds being withheld. They are being withheld and so forth. So there are a lot of moving parts here. We don't have a crystal ball, but are we expecting some solutions here in the short term, do you think, in 2026?
Well, I don't know about expecting, but we should be demanding. And that is the real challenge and the real problem that we have right here from the federal government's perspective. As we're going through these funding bills to fund government, a lot of these funds are federally funded, state-administered programs. And Minnesota's state government has lost the faith of lawmakers from all over the country. And so it is so important that the governor and the lieutenant governor and the attorney general have a plan that they can put before us and say, this is what we've discovered. This is true systematic fraud that we have found. These are the steps that we've taken. These are the people that we have fired. These are the systems that we are getting rid of. And these are the crooks that we're throwing in jail. That's the type of accountability that we're demanding and that we're asking for, and that we need to really build back faith. We look at, for instance, the SNAP program, federally funded, state administered, locally administered, $70 million a month from federal taxpayer dollars is coming into the state of Minnesota. We're losing faith from the folks at the USDA and throughout different layers and levels of federal government that we can just continue to do that. And it makes it hard from a lawmaker perspective, as I'm trying to work with my colleagues from all over the country to secure those fundings, again, that we need to help our neighbors in times of need. It just makes it tougher to legislate when we are constantly having to ask for what's going on in Minnesota. Have you fixed that fraud yet? Is anybody in jail? That's the kind of questions that we are getting day in, day out here.
So now that we know one thing for sure, Governor Walz will not be elected to a historic third consecutive term. Who do you think is best suited to lead the state out of these situations we are in right now?
Well, if we have ever in our moment in time in Minnesota needed an adult in the room, I am looking for an adult in the room that's willing to engage with the voters of Minnesota in an intellectual way about the real challenges that we have, not political slogans and talking points, but the real challenges we have. And really laying out a vision that describes what the next 30 years of Minnesota can look like. What is the future of delivery of government services at the local level? What is the future of infrastructure projects in Minnesota? What is the future of tax policy and growth and pro-growth for businesses and opportunities for our communities and our children to flourish? That's the adult in the room type mentality that I'm looking for. I have faith that there'll be a lot of candidates still getting in this race in the days to come. I have faith that we as Minnesotans can hold each other accountable to really demand that type of conversation in our candidates that are seeking the CEO position for the state of Minnesota.
So it doesn't sound like you're going to drop a name for me here this afternoon, so we'll keep on that one. But can we take your name out of the mix? Do you have any inkling of running for governor?
Listen, I'm currently in running for husband of the year, and I'm not doing so well. I'm behind in the polls. So I'm going to work my tail off to earn that title, and that's the election I'm focused on right now.
Final thoughts, a final word from you, Congressman, as we wrap up our time here this afternoon to your voters here in southern Minnesota.
Yeah, Brock, I appreciate this opportunity, and to your listeners, I appreciate the honor of a lifetime to represent you in Congress in some of the most challenging times that I think we have seen in our country. We are on the doorstep of our 250th birthday of the greatest country in the world. And I think it really comes down to this. It's on all of us to do whatever we can to figure out these crazy political times we live in. How can we get beyond them to a point where we can imagine what does the next 250 years of this great country look like? And and do that in a way that really opens up opportunities for our kids and our grandkids and, God willing, our great grandkids to continue to live this great American dream and this great American experiment that we have the opportunity to live in. So thank you for the opportunity to serve you in Congress.